Introduction to biological processes. Biological processes are the processes vital for a living organism to live. Biological processes are made up of a number of chemical reactions or other activities that results in a transformation. Some of the processes are physiological process. Those processes specifically pertinent to the functioning of integrated living units which are cells, tissues, organs, limbs and organisms. Reproduction, digestion, circulation, etc. are examples of physiological process. Response to stimulus. A change in stage or activity of a cell or an organism in terms of movement, secretion, enzyme production, gene expression, etc. as a result of a stimulus. Interaction between organisms. The processes by which an organism has an observable effect on another organism of the same or different species. Other processes which include cell growth, cell differentiation, metamorphosis and morphogenesis. Let us now look a little in detail about reproduction. Reproduction is the biological process by which new offspring individual organisms are produced from their parents. Reproduction is a fundamental feature of all known life and each individual organism exists as the result of reproduction. The known methods of reproduction are broadly grouped into two main types, sexual and asexual. In asexual reproduction, an individual can reproduce without involvement with another individual of that species. The division of a bacterial cell into two daughter cells is an example of asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is not, however, limited to a single cell organism. Sexual reproduction typically requires the involvement of two individuals or gametes, one each from the opposite type of sex. The propagation of organisms can also occur through cloning. Most animals, including humans and plants, reproduce sexually. Sexually reproducing organisms have different sets of genes for every trait called alleles. Offspring inherit one allele for each trait from each parent, thereby ensuring that offspring have a combination of the parent's genes. Diploid having two copies of every gene within an organism, it is believed that the masking of deleterious alleles favors the evolution of a dominant diploid phase in organism that alternate between haploid and diploid phases, where recombination occurs freely. Allogamy. Allogamy is a term used in the field of biological reproduction describing the fertilization of an ovum from one individual with the spermatozoa of another. Autogamy. Self-fertilization, also known as autogamy, occurs in hermaphroditic organisms where the two gametes fused in fertilization come from the same individual. The term autogamy is also used for pollination and describes self-pollination within the same flower, distinguished from gentinogamy. Transfer of pollen to a different flower on the same flowering plant or within a single monoecious gymnosperm plant. Mitosis and meiosis. Mitosis and meiosis are types of cell division. Mitosis occurs in somatic cells where meiosis occurs in gametes. Mitosis. The resultant number of cells in mitosis is twice the number of original cells. The number of chromosomes in the daughter cells is the same as that of the parent cell. Meiosis. The resultant number of cells is 4 times the number of original cells. This results in cells with half the number of chromosomes present in the parent cell. A diploid cell duplicates itself, then undergoes two divisions, tetraploid to diploid to haploid, in the process forming 4 haploid cells. This process occurs in two phases, meiosis I and meiosis II. Let us now look at digestion in detail. Digestion is the breakdown of food into smaller components that can be more easily absorbed and assimilated by the body. In certain organisms, these smaller substances are absorbed through the small intestine into the bloodstream. Digestion is a form of catabolism that is often divided into two processes based on how food is broken down, mechanical and chemical digestion. The term mechanical digestion refers to the physical breakdown of large pieces of food into smaller pieces which can subsequently be accessed by digestive enzymes. In chemical digestion, enzymes break down food into the small molecules the body can use. Bacteria use several systems to obtain nutrients from other organisms in the environment. Channel transport system. In a channel transport system, several proteins from a contiguous channel traversing the inner and outer membranes of the bacteria. It is a simple system which consists of only 3 protein subunits: the ABC protein, the membrane fusion protein, which is MFP, and outer membrane protein, which is OMP. Gastrovascular cavity. The gastrovascular cavity functions as a stomach in both digestion and the distribution of nutrients to all parts of the body. Extracellular digestion takes place within this central cavity, which is lined with the gastrodermis, the inner layer of epithelium. This cavity has only one opening to the outside that functions as both a mouth and an anus. Waste and undigested matter is excreted through the mouth, which is also the anus, which can be described as an incomplete gut. In a plant such as the Venus flytrap that can make its own food through photosynthesis, it does not eat and digest its prey for the traditional objectives of harvesting energy and carbon, but mines prey primarily for essential nutrients, that is nitrogen and phosphorus in particular, that are in short supply in its boggy acidic habitat. Phagosome. A phagosome is a vacuole formed around a particle absorbed by phagocytosis. The vacuole is formed by the fusion of the cell membrane around the particle. A phagosome is a cellular compartment in which pathogenic microorganisms can be killed and digested. Phagosomes fuse with lysosomes in their maturation process, forming phagolysosomes. In humans, Entamoeba histolytica can phagocytize red blood cells. Specialized behaviors. Regurgitation has been mentioned above under abosomal and crop, referring to crop milk, a secretion from the lining of the crop of pigeons and doves with which the parents feed the youngs by regurgitation. Many sharks have the ability to turn their stomachs inside out and avert it out of their mouths in order to get rid of unwanted contents. Let us now look at biological interaction between organisms. Biological interactions are the effects organisms in a community have on one another. In the natural world, no organism exists in absolute isolation, and thus every organism must interact with the environment and other organisms. An organism's interactions with its environment are fundamental to the survival of that organism and the functioning of the ecosystem as a whole. The black walnut secretes a chemical from its roots that harms neighboring plants, an example of antagonism. Let us now look at what is neutralism. Neutralism describes the relationship between two species that interact but do not affect each other. It describes interactions where the health of one species has absolutely no effect whatsoever on that of the other. Examples of true neutralism are virtually impossible to prove. When dealing with the complex networks of interactions presented by ecosystems, one cannot assert positively that there is absolutely no competition between or benefit to either species. However, the term is often used to describe situations where interactions are negligible or insignificant. Let us now look at amensalism. Amensalism is an interaction where an organism inflicts harm to another organism without any costs or benefits received by the other. A clear case of amensalism is where sheep or cattle trample grass. Whilst the presence of grass causes negligible detrimental effect to the animal's hoof, the grass suffers from being crushed. The next is competition. Competition is a mutually detrimental interaction between individuals, populations or species, but rarely between clades. The next is antagonism. Antagonistic interactions, one species benefits at the expense of another. Predation is an interaction between organisms in which one organism captures biomass from another. It is often used as a synonym for carnivory, but its widest definition includes all forms of one organism eating another, regardless of the trophic level. Example, herbivory, closeness of association, example, parasitism and parasitoidism, and harm done to prey, that is grazing. Intra-guild predation occurs when organism preys upon another of different species but at the same trophic level. Example, coyotes kill and ingest grey foxes in Southern California. Batesian mimicry is also an antagonistic interaction where one species has evolved to mimic another to the advantage of the copying species but to the detriment of the species being mimicked. Let us now look at what is ecological facilitation. The following two interactions can be classed as facilitative. Facilitation describes species interactions that benefit at least one of the participants and cause no harm to either. Facilitations can be categorized as mutualisms in which both species benefit, or commensalism in which one species benefits and the other is unaffected. Much of the classic ecological theory, example natural selection, niche separation, has focused on negative interactions such as predation and competition, but positive interactions, which is facilitation, are receiving increasing focus in ecological research. Commensalism. Commensalism benefits one organism and the other organism is neither benefited nor harmed. It occurs when one organism takes benefits by interacting with another organism by which the host organism is not affected. A good example is remora living with a shark. Remoras eat leftover food from the shark. The shark is not affected in the process as remoras eat only leftover food of the shark, which does not deplete the shark's resources. Mutualism. Mutualism is an interaction between two or more species where species derive a mutual benefit. For example, increased carrying capacity. Similar interactions within a species are known as cooperation. Mutualism may be classified in terms of the closeness of association, the closest being symbiosis, which is often confused with mutualism. One or both species involved in their interaction may obligate, meaning they cannot survive in the short or long term without the other species. Though mutualism has historically received less attention than other interactions such as predation, it is very important in ecology. Examples include cleaner fish, pollination and seed dispersal, gut flora, etc. Interactions which are classified by mechanisms include symbiosis. The term symbiosis can be used to describe various degrees of close relationship between organisms of different species. Sometimes it is used only for cases where both organisms benefit. Sometimes it is used more generally to describe all varieties of relatively tight relationships, that is even parasitism but not predation. Some even go so far as to use it to describe predation. It can be used to describe relationship where one organism lives on or in another, or it can be used to describe cases where organisms are related by mutual stereotypic behaviors. A large percentage of herbivores have mutualistic gut fauna that help them digest plant matter, which is more difficult to digest than animal prey. Coral reefs are a result of mutualisms between coral organisms and various types of algae that live inside them. Biologic processes also includes cell growth. The term cell growth is used in the context of cell development and cell division. When used in the context of cell division, it refers to the growth of cell populations where one cell, that is the mother cell, grows and divides to produce two daughter cells, that is the M phase. When used in the context of cell development, the term refers to increase in the cytoplasmic and organelle volume which happens in the G1 phase, as well as increase in the genetic material which happens in the G2 phase following the replication during the S phase. Cell division. Cell reproduction is asexual. For most of the constituents of cell, growth is a steady, continuous process interrupted only briefly at M phase when the nucleus and the cell divide into two. The process of cell division, called cell cycle, has four major parts called phases. The first part, called the G1 phase, is marked by synthesis of various enzymes that are required for DNA replication. The second part of the cell cycle is the S phase, where DNA replication produces two identical sets of chromosomes. The third part is the G2 phase. Significant protein synthesis occurs during this phase, mainly involving the production of microtubules which are required during the process of division called mitosis. The fourth phase, which is the M phase, consists of nuclear division, which is called as the karyokinesis, and the cytoplasmic division, which is called the cytokinesis, accompanied by the formation of a new cell membrane. Cell differentiation. In developmental biology, cellular differentiation is the process by which a less specialized cell becomes a more specialized cell type. Differentiation occurs numerous times during the development of a multicellular organism as the organism changes from a simple zygote to a complex system of tissues and cell types. Differentiation continues in adulthood as adult stem cells divide and create fully differentiated daughter cells during tissue repair and during normal cell turnover. Differentiation dramatically changes a cell's size, shape, membrane potential, metabolic activity and responsiveness to signals. These channels are largely due to the highly controlled modifications in gene expression. With a few exceptions, cellular differentiation almost never involves a change in the DNA sequence itself. Thus, different cells can have very different physical characteristics despite having the same genome. A cell that can differentiate into all cell types of the adult organism is known as pluripotent. Such cells are called embryonic stem cells in animals and meristematic cells in higher plants. A cell that can differentiate into all cell types including the placental tissue is known as totipotent. In mammals, only the zygote and the subsequent blastomers are totipotent. Let us now look at what metamorphosis is. Metamorphosis is a biological process by which an animal physically develops after birth or hatching, involving a conspicuous and relatively abrupt change in the animal's body structure through cell growth and differentiation. Some insects, amphibians, molluscs, crustaceans, echinoderms and tunicates undergo metamorphosis, which is usually accompanied by a change of habitat or behavior. Let us now look at what is morphogenesis. Morphogenesis is the biological process that causes an organism to develop its shape. It is one of the three fundamental aspects of developmental biology along with the control of cell growth and cell differentiation. The process controls the organized spatial distribution of cells during the embryonic development of an organism. Morphogenesis can take place also in a mature organism, in cell culture or inside tumor cell masses only. Morphogenesis also describes the development of unicellular life forms that do not have an embryonic stage in their life cycle, or describes the evolution of a body structure within a taxonomic group. The next biological processes are response to stimuli. The first is tropism. Tropism is a biological phenomenon indicating growth or turning movement of biological organism, usually a plant, in response to an environmental stimulus. In tropisms, this response is dependent on the direction of the stimulus as opposed to nastic movements, which are non-directional responses. Viruses and other pathogens also affect what is called host tropism, tissue tropism or cell tropism, or in which case tropism refers to the way in which different viruses, pathogens have evolved to preferentially target specific host species, specific tissue or specific cell types within those species. Tropisms are usually named for the stimulus involved. For example, phototropism is a reaction to light and may be either positive, that is towards the stimulus, or negative, which is away from the stimulus. Tropisms are typically associated with plants, where an organism is capable of directed physical movement, that is motility, movement or other activity in response to a specific stimulus, is more likely to be regarded by behavioristic as a taxis, directional response, or a kinesis, which is non-directional response. The next process is secretion. Secretion is the process of elaborating, releasing or oozing chemicals or a secreted chemical substance from a cell or gland. In contrast to excretion, the substance may have a certain function rather than being a waste product. The classic mechanism of cell secretion is via secretory portals of the cell plasma membrane called the porosomes. Porosomes are permanent cup-shaped lipoprotein structure at the cell plasma membrane where secretory vesicles transiently dock and fuse to release intravesicular contents from the cell. Secretion in bacterial species means the transport or translocation of effector molecules, for example, proteins, enzymes or toxins such as cholera toxin in pathogenic bacteria, for example, is the Vibria cholerae, from across the interior of the bacterial cell to its exterior. Secretion is a very important mechanism in bacterial functioning and operation in their natural surrounding environment for adaptation and survival. The next process is gene expression. Gene expression is the process by which information from a gene is used in the synthesis of a functional gene product. In genetics, gene expression is the most fundamental level at which the genotype gives rise to the phenotype. The genetic code stored in the DNA is interpreted by gene expression, and the properties of the expression give rise to the organism's phenotype. Such phenotypes are often expressed by the synthesis of proteins that control the organism's shape or that act as enzyme catalyzing specific metabolic pathways characterizing the organism. With this, we come to the end of various biological processes in living creatures.